I have not, because I just want so. Good evening. What I have prepared here is the question, only one question, and with the one sort of request. And the question I'm going to ask you is for the first time I think you have heard, and maybe also the audience. So I'm going to just read out what I've written here, and I've given that so that you know exactly what I'm asking for. My name is Wangjuk Tsiring. For your information, I'm a firm believer in the middle path approach for a peaceful resolution of the question of Tibet, both for the sake of the Tibetans now living in Tibet under China and the Chinese. But I also know Tibet was a free and independent country before 1950, as I was born and lived there for a good 18 years of my life. I received my Canadian citizenship just 8 weeks back, and at the same time got my Canadian passport. Being born before 1949, I'm happy to inform you that I have got just Lhasa, Tibet as my country of birth in the passport according to the deadline established by the government of Canada. It may seem insignificant to some, but made a big difference to me and to the Tibetans at large if we think carefully. It shows that the Canadian government thinks that Tibet was not a part of China until then. Interestingly, the US Congress has passed a bill a few years ago which said Tibet is an occupied country. Just recently, a Spanish court passed a judgment that Tibet was an independent country before the Chinese invasion. So now I have one question and a request to the candidates. I would appreciate your candid answer and advice from each of you. If elected, my first question is, do you believe that Tibet was not a part of China until it was invaded by Chinese Communist Army in 1950? And if so, will you be willing to sponsor or support a bill in the Canadian Parliament to recognize the Tibetan government in exile located in Dharamsala, India, as the legitimate government of Tibet? And the request is, what do you advise the Tibetan Canadians to do to realize this goal? Thank you for your in advance, and also SFT for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, you can go first.
Thank you. I certainly believe that Tibet was an independent country before it was invaded. But I also believe that His Holiness's middle way is about an autonomous Tibet today under the Chinese Constitution. And that's what I support. I want to be realistic always, honest always, in terms of what can be achieved.
Yes.
I'm
not asking for independence. I'm just saying that the fact that...
I am very happy, so I'm very happy to raise the fact of the invasion, and I've done so in discussions in public many times. I'm also, I use the careful language that His Holiness uses in speaking with the Chinese ambassador and embassy, in speaking publicly, because I want Tibet to succeed. I don't know why, because I'm not an expert diplomat, but I've spent some time now abroad. I feel optimistic. I feel like Tibet is a South Africa in the making. I feel like Tibet is a chance to realize this autonomy, and I think the wisdom of the Dalai Lama is exceptional. And it's benefited people from countries all over. So I would happily frame that in a motion to Parliament. And in terms of, and I know this is very important, in terms of achieving that, I don't want to just say more of the same. I know there are young people here today who really want to see something happen in their lifetime and want to see it happen for them and for their children. And all I can say is that you're on the right side, to have the middle way, to show the character, to show the persistence and the patience, and to show the respect and love for life and for other human beings, and to be so embracing. The Tibetan people are everywhere because they are embraced by everyone. And I think that that is going to win out. I can't tell you, I'm not a China expert, I can't tell you what point the tipping point will be, but it will be Tibet that will be chosen eventually to be the showcase of human rights and so on if there is a turn in China. if we, the other nations, are successful in persuading and forcing and pressuring a standard to come back. And I just say this one thing to the people who must suffer a lot of impatience. For you, sir, who come from there and have it, I'm glad to know it's on your passport, but I can only relate. I can't really feel the same angst that you must feel, but I would just say this, that China is being forced into a certain kind of mainstream. Yes, they have a lot of power. Yes, they have a lot of leverage, but it's time now for them to reconcile and to come back into some part of the community of nations. And that's what has always been their promise. We weren't overlooking human rights. We're talking about those human rights on the promise that they also would get better. Not just living standards of some artificial thing, but human rights and respect for cultural diversity, for cultural identity, and all the things that His Holiness talks about in the middle way. So I would happily help with that, and I encourage and counsel people to be more excited than ever about its possibility. Thank you.
Mr. Train?
To your first question, sir, yes. To your second question, it is a very complicated process, as you well know, as our friend over here has just elucidated. But I will say to you that my second answer is yes. As to what you can do about it, you can do exactly what you're doing. And that is when we went down to that protest today in front of the Chinese consulate on that cold April day when everybody was sitting there on the curb, quietly, silently, bravely, speaking loudly. That is the Tibetan way. That is His Holiness's way. And it is far, far stronger than throwing bricks or crashing windows or burning trucks. Because what it does is it tells people that you have the discipline, that you have the restraint, that you have the wisdom that others do not have. And that speaks far louder than any word. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Mr. Sering, congratulations on your Canadian citizenship. And congratulations for having your passport reflect what I'm sure many in this room would like to have, which is recognizing Tibet as a country. But I do recognize that Tibet was an independent country when it was invaded. And clearly the Canadian government recognized that because it has put Tibet on your passport. His Holiness has said in stepping back from his political responsibilities to focus on his spiritual responsibilities, he has said that it is now important for the Tibetan government in exile to step up and to play that role. And I was very proud to be an election observer here in Canada for the Tibetan parliamentary elections. So I think now it is important that this government begin to function on behalf of the Tibetan people. So I would be pleased to support such a bill. And I think that in how the Tibetan people are most effective, two ways. Outside of Parliament, in actions, like the action today, outside of the Chinese consulate, drawing attention, putting a spotlight on the situation in Tibet, but also holding politicians to account, not just for what they say, but what they do. And I think having this process tonight, the first all-candidates meeting for the Tibetan community in Parkdale-High Park, maybe the first in Canada, I don't know. But I say congratulations to you, because this is exactly what you should be doing, is demanding that the Canadian democratic process work for you, and I'm sure it will. Thank you.